This is Chapter 8 review. Number 1, I'm going to factor out a GCF. I have a 7 in the first term and a 21 in the second, but I don't have a number in the third, so I have to go directly to factor out just an x, y. So I bring down the 7. X goes in x squared x times y goes in y squared y, because remember when you divide you subtract the exponents, plus 21. X goes into x evenly, y goes into y squared y, minus, and then x squared goes into x squared evenly one time. So I'll put a 1 and close the parentheses. Number 2, I'm going to factor by grouping. I'm going to group my first two together, and then this negative has got to go inside, and I have to put a plus sign in between. Now I'm going to factor out a 3p and get n minus 5. And in the second group, I'm going to factor out a negative, because if your first term is ever a negative, you have to factor out a negative. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4. And when you factor out a negative, it changes the sign. So I get n plus 5. And then what's left over is 3p minus 4. Okay, example 3, I'm going to factor by grouping. And I'm going to factor out a 2m, and I get k minus 6. And then I'm going to factor out a 7, and I get 6 minus k. Now, that's called inverse, so I'm going to rewrite it, scratch it out, rewrite, flipping the last two terms. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. Factor out a 2m, and I get k minus 6. And then I'm going to factor out a negative 7, and I get k minus 6. Now, I get a k minus 6 times 2m minus 7. Example number 4, there's not a GCF. This is a simple trinomial that factors into two binomials. Look at your last sign. If the last sign is positive, then that means they're both going to be whatever the first sign is. So they're both going to be negative. Factors of x squared, x and x. Now let's list the factors of 12. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. Because the factors are, the signs are the same, I want to find which factors of 12 add up to get 8. 2 and 6. Check, you get negative 6x, and a negative 2x is a negative 8x. That is correct. Okay, number 5, it says factor and solve. Before I can factor, I have to have the equation equal to 0. So I'm going to add 10 and put it equal to 0. Now, I'm going to do the guess and check method and just bring down the equal 0. Once you bring it down, you can ignore it. Alright, your signs are going to be the same. They're both going to be positive. Factors of 5 are 1 and 5, so I have no choice but to use 1x and 5x. Factors of 10, I can either use 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. I am going to try the 2 and the 5. I am guessing. So let's check. Is a 5x plus 10x is 15x. Is that my middle term? No, my middle term is 27x. So I'm going to flip the 2 and the 5 around. Okay, now your outside is 2x, your inside is 25x, which is 27x, and that is your middle term. But I'm not finished. Now that I have factored, I now put each one equal to 0 and solve. Subtract 5, so I get x is equal to negative 5. On the other side, subtract 2, and x is equal to negative 2/5. Number 4, I'm going to go ahead and do the AC method on this one. So the AC method is you multiply your A and your C together. That's 4 times 15 and 60. Now, I'm going to list all the factors of 60. Now look at your signs. The last sign is positive. So if I were to make my two binomials right now, that I would have the same sign. So that means which factors of 60 add up to get 17? And that is 5 and 12. So now I am going to split the middle term. So 4x squared plus 5x plus 12x is plus 15 is equal to 0. Because 5x plus 12x gives me 17x. That's how I split it. Okay, now I'm going to factor by grouping. I'm going to group my first two together, group my last two together. I'm going to factor out an x and I get 4x plus 5. And then I'm going to factor out a 3 and get 4x plus 5. And just keep bringing down the equal 0. Now I'm going to factor out a 4x plus 5 and get x plus 3. Put each one equal to 0. Subtract 5. So x is equal to negative 5/4 and x is equal to negative 3. Number 7, 49x squared minus 81. That's a difference of two perfect squared that factors in 7x plus 9 times 7x minus 9. Number 8, I think this is a perfect square trinomial because the first term is a perfect square and the last term is a perfect square. So I'm going to factor, and that factors into two identical binomials. My signs are both going to be minus. So that's what I'm going to try first. 3x and 3x go in the front of each binomial. And square root of 49 is 7 and 7. So I'm going to try that. That's a negative 21x. And a negative 21x gives me a negative 42x. And that is my middle term. So it is a perfect square trinomial that factors into two identical binomials. Number 10, I'm going to factor completely. The hint of what you're going to have to, when you're going to have to do multiple steps is the word completely. Always look to see, do you have a GCF? And I have a common factor of 3. So I get 5m to the third plus 4m squared minus 3 goes into 375 125 times. And 3 goes in 100 100 times. Excuse me, 300 100 times. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. It might be easier to just rewrite this without the 3 and without the parentheses. Then group the first two together, group the last two together. Now I'm going to factor out an m squared, and I get 5m plus 4. And then I'm going to factor out a negative 25. And I get an m. Now remember, when you factor out a negative, it changes the sign. Oh, 25 goes into 5m. 125, 5m. 5 times, I mean. Now I'm going to factor out a 5m plus 4. And what do I get left over? M squared minus 25. Now do not forget to now bring down the 3. Are we finished? No, we are not, because of the m squared minus 25. That factors into m plus 5 times m minus 5. Okay, number 11. I'm going to factor out a 2x. And I get 2x squared plus 5x minus 2 goes into 84, 42 times. Okay, now I'm going to look at this, what's in this polynomial. That is a trinomial that I'm going to factor into binomials. I am going to split my I'm not going to split my terms. I'm going to do the guess and check method. Factors of 2 is 1x and 2x. Your signs are going to be different. Factors of 42, 1 and 42, 2 times 21, 3 times, does 3 go into 42? Yeah, 14. And 6 times 7. Now I'm just going to guess and check. I'm going to try the 6 here, the 7 here. The outside is a negative 6x. My inside is 12x, which is a positive 5x. Got it the very first time around. Now do not forget to bring down the 2x. And that is your final answer. Number 12. We're going to use the square root property, where we want to get rid of the square root, so the opposite is taking the square root. And when you square root, what's inside just falls out. And the square root of 144 is 12. And don't forget, this is where people make their mistake. They forget to give it plus or minus 12. Now I'm going to add 9 to both sides. So x is equal to 9 plus 12 or 9 minus 12. And 9 plus 12 is 21, and 9 minus 12 is a negative 3. So there are your two answers. Number 13, I'm going to take the square root, and I get x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7 is 2.6. So then I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So that's x is equal to 4 plus 2.6, or x is equal to 4 minus 2.6. So when I add 4 plus 2.6, I get 6.6, and then 4 minus 2.6. Now make sure, if you're going to do this, that's 4.0 minus 2.6. That's 1.4. And there are your two answers. Okay, here's number 33 on your review. I am going to factor out a 2CD. And I get 2c minus 5c squared minus 2cd squared plus 5d to the second. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. So let's just rewrite this. I think it'll be easier to see. I'm going to group the first two together, group the last two together. Now I'm going to factor out a c and get 2 minus 5c. And then I'm going to factor out a negative d to the second, and I get 2c. Oh, I forgot my c up here. Alright, I apologize. I messed up right here. That should be a 4. So then that's going to be a c to the third. So that'll be c squared. Oh, let me back up right here. I'm going to factor out a c squared. And I get 2c minus 5. And then I'm going to factor out a d squared, and I get 2c minus 5. Okay. Now I get 2c minus 5 times c squared minus d squared. Now don't forget to bring down the 2cd. And I am almost finished. This is a difference of two perfect square that factors into c plus d times c minus d.